The Subcommittee on Transportation and Maritime Security will come to order for today's hearing titled Concealed Carry-Ons, Confronting the Surge in Firearms in TSA Checkpoints. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the subcommittee in recess at any point. Thank you to our witnesses for joining us today to discuss the surging number of firearms at TSA checkpoints. Unfortunately, this topic could not be more timely. Last year, TSA caught nearly 6,000 firearms at checkpoints nationwide, a new and unprecedented record. That's an average of 16 guns that TSA prevented from boarding a plane each day. Most disturbingly, 86% of those guns were loaded. In 2020, TSA caught 10 firearms per million passengers screened compared to 5 per million in 2019. On a per passenger basis, that's a 100% increase in just 1 year. The good news is that TSA has a talented workforce and top-notch technologies that are keeping us safe. But the bad news is that it only takes a single gun slipping through for tragedy to ensue. The deadly consequences of a hijacker bringing a loaded firearm on a plane are not difficult to imagine. Even when TSA successfully interdicts a weapon, transportation workers and the traveling public face dangers. Just a few months ago in Atlanta, a passenger accidentally discharged his firearm at a checkpoint, resulting in chaos, injuries, and flight delays. And of course, we cannot forget the horrific incidences involving gunmen deliberately targeting airports. We honor the memory of Gerardo Hernandez, who was a TSO in Los Angeles, who was shot for simply doing his job and died in the line of duty. We also remember 5 people who were killed standing at a baggage claim in Fort Lauderdale. The status quo is simply unacceptable. The increase in unruly passenger incidents, alongside the increase in firearms injected into the aviation environment, make for a toxic combination. We need to explore a range of solutions to keep guns off of planes and away from the TSA checkpoints. An important piece of this conversation is raising awareness of the laws on the books. Responsible firearm owners follow the law. They know that if you want to fly with a firearm, you can declare it to the airline and ship it in your checked baggage. Yet time and again, when TSA catches passengers with guns in their carry-on, most passengers say they forget their gun was even in their bag. In those cases, TSA and airports can play an important role in educating passengers. Prominent and consistent signage and expanded public awareness campaigns and can very well ensure everyone knows the rules and that responsible firearm owners will follow established procedures. TSA can and should also explore steps to increase deterrence. To that end, I'm looking forward to hearing our witnesses' thoughts on the sufficiency of the current fines, the pre-check suspensions, and other consequences TSA imposes on passengers bringing firearms to checkpoints. Bringing a firearm to a checkpoint is a federal crime. If you intend to bring a gun on a plane, you can go to prison for it, but intent is very hard for prosecutors to prove, which is why it is so important that TSA use the regulatory tools at its disposal to make passengers think twice before packing that weapon in their carry-on. This should not be a partisan issue. This is not about gun control, but about aviation security. We must all stand together in support of keeping loaded pistols off planes. TSA has an impressive record of catching firearms, but we have gone for approximately 1,000 firearms found at checkpoints in 2010 to nearly 6,000 last year. This is a 6-fold increase in little more than a decade. If and when something unthinkable happens, we can hardly act surprised. And it simply should not take a tragedy, whether it's a hijacking or an accidental discharge, that claims a life to trigger action. I stand ready to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and for witnesses today to keep our aviation system secure. Our panel brings important perspectives to this conversation. The surge in firearms at TSA checkpoints disrupts airport operations, endangers the frontline workforce and travelers, and diverts law enforcement resources from where they are needed. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on how we can all work together to solve this challenge. And with that, I now recognize the ranking member of our subcommittee, the gentleman from Florida, for an opening statement. Mr. Jimenez.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chairwoman Watson Coleman, for holding this hearing today. There has been a concerning rise in the number of firearms that TSA officers have found in airport security checkpoints nationwide. As we saw recently at the Atlanta airport, a passenger with a firearm accidentally discharged their gun at the checkpoint, injuring other travelers and creating mass chaos and confusion at the terminal. Passengers evacuated onto the tarmac, flight arrivals and departures were grounded, and the individual who fired the weapon was able to escape the airport and remain on the run for over a week. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses today on how a security incident like the one in Atlanta can be prevented in the future. It is important for us to learn what we can and must and how we can improve the airport, TSA, and law enforcement responses. The recent incident in Atlanta and overall rise in the number of discovered firearms nationally highlights the constantly evolving threat to our aviation system. And I agree with our chairwoman, this is not a gun control issue. This is an education issue, and we need to work, both sides need to work to try to prevent this to make our airports safer. TSA must ensure that its workforce has what it needs in next generation computer tomography technology to accurately find firearms and other prohibited items in carry-on bags. TSA cannot continue to delay and slow walk this needed investment in airport checkpoints nationwide. Our dedicated transportation security officers continue to protect the traveling public day in and day out. They deserve better pay that is reflective of the immense value that they provide to our aviation system. I thank all the witnesses for being here today, especially Ralph Gutierrez from Miami-Dade County, who runs my home airport, Miami International Airport. Pre-pandemic, the airport saw over 47 million passengers annually, and I look forward to our business and international travel resuming the 2019 levels in the very near future. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Jimenez. The chair would recognize the chairman of the committee, Mr. Thompson, if he's on. Not seeing Mr. Thompson. We recognize the ranking member, Mr. Katko, if he's on. Not seeing Mr. Katko. Members are reminded that the committee will operate according to the guidelines laid out by the chairman, and the ranking member in their February 3rd, 2021 colloquy regarding remote procedures. I now welcome our panel of witnesses. Our first witness is Mr. Balram B. Odare. I do hope I did not bastardize that name. Please correct me when you get a chance to speak. Mr. B. Odare is the general manager of the Hartsfield Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Previously, he was the chief operating officer for the Houston Airport System, and he has served with distinction for 22 years in the U.S. Army. Thank you for your service, sir. Next, we have Mr. Greg Regan, who serves as president of the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO, a labor organization consisting of 33 unions across the transportation sector. Included among TTD's members are transportation security officers, flight attendants, pilots, ticket agents, and other transportation workers. Mr. Reagan previously served as TTD's Secretary Treasurer. I'd also like to welcome Mr. Jason Wallace, the president of ALEAN, the Airport Law Enforcement Agencies Network. He also serves as the chief of police for the Port of Portland, Oregon, where he has worked to secure Portland International Airport for over 2 decades. And finally, we will hear from Mr. Ralph Qt, I hope I didn't mess that up too badly either. the Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Miami-Dade Aviation Department, where he has also served in a variety of other senior roles. Without objection, the witness's full statements will be inserted in the record. I now recognize each witness to summarize his or her statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Mr. Bihodari.
Good afternoon, Chairman Watson Coleman, Ranking Member Jimenez, members of the subcommittee, Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Katko, and members of the full committee. Thank you for inviting me to speak today about this especially important issue. We appreciate the committee's support of Atlanta Airport and your commitment to airport safety. I am Balaram Bihodari, General Manager at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, known as ATL. And on behalf of Mayor Andrea Dickens, I'm honored to appear before this subcommittee to provide our perspective on reducing the number of firearms at our screening checkpoints. The team at ATL knows firsthand just how serious this issue is. On Saturday, November 20th, 2021, a passenger presented his carry-on bag for inspection at the main domestic security checkpoint. When his bag was selected for secondary screening, he reached into the bag and grabbed his weapon. The weapon discharged once, and passengers in the security queue understandably ran for cover. Social media posts described multiple gunshots and an active shooter. That was not the case. Our law enforcement team responded immediately and very quickly secured the scene. Our response and ability to return operations to normal in a timely manner speaks volumes about ATL preparedness. However, it also reinforces the challenges posed by the increased presence of weapons at security screening locations. In 2019, more than 824 million passengers were screened nationwide, and 4,400 weapons were found at TSA checkpoints that year. However, in 2021, TSA screened 585 million passengers and discovered a whopping 5,972 firearms at checkpoints. Some 86% of those guns were loaded, and 507 of those guns were discovered in Atlanta in 2021. Clearly, this is an issue that needs to be addressed nationwide. Why are so many guns retrieved at our checkpoints? The first answer reflects a bit of good news. It highlights the exceptional work of our dedicated TSA officers. It is their job to ensure the safety of the flying public. And through their diligence and advances in screening technology, they are doing precisely that. The increase in firearm at checkpoints is a function of an individual gun owner's lack of responsibility, be it forgetfulness or a misguided belief that weapons will not be discovered. We must continue to inform and educate the public about firearms rules and regulations. In collaboration, we at ATL have taken substantial steps to bring attention to this issue. Partnering with the airlines and security and law enforcement agencies at the local, state, and federal levels, we have amplified our messaging to increase public awareness. That includes training our staff with appropriate instructions to passenger in queue and installing dynamic and static signage with increased message frequency. We also have shared gun restriction messaging with share ride operators and local media outlets to remind passengers that guns are not allowed at airport checkpoints. What more can we do? There are 4 elements we recommend for further exploration. First, strengthen the penalty of violators by reviewing the existing fine structure. Next, have violators attend mandatory gun safety training. Third, Consider the options of including violators on the no-fly list until training is complete. And finally, assess the possible suspension of trusted travel privilege for violators. In partnership, we are consistently examining ways to inform and educate and focus intensely on reducing firearms brought to ATL screening checkpoint. Again, we appreciate the subcommittee attention to this issue and your commitment to improving the safety of our nation's airport. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Vidari, and thank you for your thoughtful recommendations that we will take under consideration. We now like to recognize Mr. Reagan to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Watson-Coleman and Ranking Member Jimenez. And thank you for inviting me to testify on the alarming increase in firearms confiscated at TSA security checkpoints. I speak on behalf of 36 unions who represent America's frontline transportation workforce. Many of those unions represent passenger-facing workers across the entire aviation sector, including pilots, flight attendants, passenger service agents, and most critical for today's hearing, transportation security officers who are responsible for ensuring the safety and security of our entire aviation system. This hearing could not come at a more important time, both for the health and safety of frontline aviation workers and for the general public on board aircraft and on the ground. As this committee is well aware, COVID has driven tension in airports and aboard airplanes to an all-time high. In 2021, the FAA reported a record 5,981 incidents of unruly passenger behavior. This behavior has been directed at TSOs themselves, as well as passenger service agents, flight crew, and other airline and airport workers. In many cases, these employees have been physically assaulted, resulting in broken bones, lost teeth, and long-term injuries that have often prevented them from returning to work. While this behavior is absolutely unacceptable on its own, and Congress and the administration must do more to protect these employees, it is paramount that the current crisis of assaults does not escalate even further to the point of gun violence. As the chair mentioned earlier, right now demonstrates just how real this threat is, with 6,000 guns confiscated over the last year at security checkpoints. 86% of those were loaded, and many of them had a round in the chamber. That broke the previous confiscation record set in 2019 by approximately 1,500 weapons. And it came at a time when domestic travel is still below what it was at pre-pandemic levels. This spike in confiscated firearms underscores the essential role of TSOs in maintaining aviation safety. We support efforts by local law enforcement, airport authorities, and the federal government to remind passengers of their legal obligations concerning their firearms. But it ultimately falls on the shoulders of TSOs to identify and confiscate weapons at these checkpoints. There is no action, response, or antidote to the current surge in illegal passenger-carried firearms more effective than a well-trained and well-treated TSO workforce. To ensure we meet this goal, TTD and our affiliated unions make the following recommendations. First, we call for the passage of the Transportation Security Administration Workforce Act of 2021, which would put TSOs on equal footing with other federal employees by providing workplace rights and protections under Title V, access to the Merit Systems Protection Board, and GS pay scale with regular step increases. TSOs currently report the second lowest job satisfaction of any DHS subagency, and only 32% of TSOs are satisfied with their pay rate. Providing these critical security employees with basic federal workforce protections and a fair pay scale are important first steps toward improving morale, decreasing turnover rates, and strengthening our security workforce. I want to thank the full committee Chairman Thompson for his longstanding leadership on this important bill, and to those of you who are among the 227 bipartisan co-sponsors during this Congress. Congress must also ensure that TSA has the resources it needs to carry out its mission. That is why we call for passage of the FASTER Act, which would prevent the continued diversion of aviation security fee revenue for non-security purposes, and instead ensure that these funds are used as intended to strengthen the operational capabilities of TSA and its workforce. At the same time, Congress and TSA must not take steps backward. Efforts to privatize the TSA and hand over fundamentally governmental duties to private operators is not a security-first solution. TSA was created after 9/11, when Congress and security experts alike recognized that the existing hodgepodge of private screening operations throughout the country created vulnerabilities in our system privatization efforts willfully ignore the painful lessons learned over 20 years ago. Well, we are also deeply concerned that TSA's recent announcement that it will introduce non-certified, quote, security support assistance into the security checkpoint may have the opposite of the intended effect on security and situational awareness. Given the influx of firearms, the airport passenger screening workforce must be at its most effective. Neither of those initiatives will contribute to this goal. Finally, as TSA considers how to respond to the spike in firearms and other security threats, we call on the agency to involve representatives of airline and airport employees in the safety and security process. TSA has not permitted representatives of these employees to serve as, quote, regulated parties in certain TSA proceedings, denying the agency of critical information from the front lines. I again caution this committee not to take steps that undermine critical safety workers in this country, but to instead focus your efforts on providing TSOs with the training and the quality work environment that they need and deserve to protect themselves, other transportation workers, and the traveling public. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Reagan, for your very considered advocacy and testimony. Be assured that we recognize the importance of our TSO employees and the fact that they do deserve respect and decent pay and protection and opportunity. So thank you very much. Chair now recognizes Mr. Wallace to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and let me apologize for the construction that's surrounding me today. So, Chairwoman Watson-Coleman, Ranking Member Jimenez, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about the issue of firearms at the TSA checkpoints and the impacts on airport law enforcement. I'm the Chief of Police of the Portland International Airport and the President of ALEAN, Aviation Law Enforcement Agencies Network. I've been in law enforcement for 26 years, and I've been the chief here at the port for the past 7 years. PDX is the largest commercial airport in Oregon and Southwest Washington. My number one priority is to ensure the safety of everyone who utilizes airport facilities. ALEAN has over 100 member airport departments located at the nation's largest airports. ALEAN supports airport police with annual training conferences and broad engagement on issues of civil aviation security. The national growth in passengers over the past decade also came with an increase in the number of firearms at the TSA security checkpoint. In 2011, TSA detected 1,320 firearms at the checkpoints, and as already mentioned, in 2021, that number grew to 6,000 firearms. Here at PDX, our growth in firearms at checkpoints mirrored the national trend. In 2011, we had 19 loaded, mostly firearms detected at our checkpoints, and 66 were found in 2019. Over 90% of those firearms were loaded. And even during the global pandemic and its impact on air travel, TSA saw a doubling in the per capita rate of passengers with firearms screened at the checkpoints. This steady growth is alarming to me as the Chief of Police and the President of ALEAN. When the TSA identifies a firearm through the screening process, TSA and police staff immediately investigate. These investigations shut down the checkpoint lane during the encounter, causing delays as well as creating a very stressful situation for TSA staff and travelers. The firearm investigations are staff intensive, thorough, and involve multiple steps to secure the firearm and conduct an owner interview. Ultimately, police must resolve the incident in accordance with each state's laws, and there might not be an appropriate state criminal charge. The varied state criminal enforcement statutes limit the options available to address the increase in firearms in airport terminals. Civil penalties may be imposed by TSA to travelers who bring firearms to the checkpoint. Local jurisdictions are working to address the situation. Here at the port, we engaged the Oregon state policymakers over the course of several years about this issue. In 2021, the Oregon legislature passed Senate Bill 554. The law added passenger terminal at PDX to the definition of a public building in Oregon, which prohibits intentional possession of a firearm within the terminal. Concealed handgun license holders are also subject to a misdemeanor charge for bringing a firearm to the checkpoint. Firearms and checked bags consistent with federal and airline policy are allowed. Law enforcement officers and a limited number of listed groups of persons may possess firearms in the terminal. I believe the change has enhanced our ability to protect the traveling public and provide us with the authority to arrest or cite passengers and allow appropriate enforcement action to take place. However, the increase of firearms at checkpoints reduces the ability of TSA and airport police to focus on their primary duties in other sensitive areas of the checkpoint, and securing those airports against threats. I would ask the subcommittee to consider these actions to help bring increased awareness to the traveling public about the prohibition of firearms at checkpoints. So I offer these following recommendations. First, consistent and clear signage at the start of the checkpoint queue in airports. I believe this is an issue of such critical importance that there should be a standard sign at every single airport checkpoint prohibiting firearms through passenger screening and including the relevant penalties if found with a firearm. The signage should not be optional for local federal security directors or airport operators. Second, clear and consistent communication from airlines to passengers and an opportunity for TSA to work with the airlines regarding passenger firearm protocol at the checkpoint. Airlines should be part of the solution by communicating with passengers the checkpoint firearms rules and policy when check-in, whether by phone, kiosk, or in person, regarding the prohibition of firearms in carry-on bags and through the checkpoint. Violations should come with increased fines. We all know the federal fines must act as a deterrent, an actual deterrent to folks who carry firearms. The current fines, as you know, range from $1,500 to $13,910. And to my knowledge and my experience, the maximum fine is rarely, if ever, imposed and clearly not serving as a deterrent. I believe TSA and Congress should consider significantly raising the civil penalties imposed to make an actual impact. Enrollment in DHS Trusted Traveler programs is a privilege. Currently, those who violate rules regarding firearms will have the Trusted Traveler benefits revoked for a period of time. I believe the program should be revised to allow and encourage DHS to permanently withdraw the status of any traveler who violates the firearms policy at the checkpoints. I thank you for this opportunity to address you today about the increase in firearms at the airport checkpoints, and I look forward to working with the subcommittee on solutions that will assist us in protecting airports. I am happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your perspective, Mr. Wallace. The chair now recognizes Mr. QTA to summarize his statement for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Watson Coleman and Ranking Member Jimenez and distinguished members of the subcommittee. And thank you for inviting me to testify before you today on this very important and alarming issue at our country's airports. My name is Ralph Coutier, and I'm the Director and Chief Executive Officer of Miami International Airport. If I may, Madam Chair, I'd like to take a moment to especially extend a warm abrazo, as we say here in Miami, to our hometown Congressman, Ranking Member Jimenez, and thank him for his many years of service to Miami-Dade County and to our airport and the strong support that he's given our airport over the years. Here's some of the news here at MIA. On the heels of 3 consecutive record-breaking years in passenger volume, we went through a very difficult 2020 after COVID hit. We finished up 2019 with 47 million passengers, and as Ranking Member Jimenez mentioned, and that translated after COVID to a 2020, which we had 18 million passengers come to our airport, a significant decrease in passenger volume. Now, from that, we have rebounded and had a very robust recovery over the last year. We finished off 2021 with a record-breaking year for us in November, December. We had a significant increase in passenger volume. 10 of the top 10 days in MIA's history, we had 8 of those top 10 days in November, December this year, including our #1 day of all time, December 19th, where we moved almost 166,000 passengers through our airport. So the good news is that we have rebounded very well from the COVID pandemic. We are currently the #1 fastest growing airport in the United States. We are the #2 airport for international passengers in the country. And we're currently the 4th or 5th busiest airport in the U.S., depending on what day we look at those stats. So I guess the point there is that the news is very good from our end, but with that good news comes very big challenges, not the least of which is the challenge that we're discussing today. So as far as the issue of firearms at checkpoints is concerned, my colleagues have already mentioned the statistics, which are alarming. Nearly 6,000 weapons confiscated at checkpoints nationwide. That's unacceptable. Here at MIA ourselves, we have had a rash of confiscated weapons. In 2020, during the pandemic, we set a record by TSA confiscating 60 weapons at our checkpoints. Unfortunately, we broke that record in 2021, which resulted in 75 arrests by our Miami-Dade Police Department at our checkpoints. Again, not a number that we're proud of, and a very alarming number. And that, combined with some of the statistics that one of my colleagues mentioned regarding unruly passengers, is of great concern to us. I mean, 6,000 unruly passenger incidents throughout the country is not a good number. We had 607 here at Miami-Dade County at our airport, and that we essentially tripled the long-standing national average from pre-COVID, which is 150 to 200 unruly passenger incidents a year. So we're very concerned about those numbers, but are we enthusiastic that we can change that paradigm? Absolutely. We've taken steps starting in Thanksgiving to try to curb those numbers. So one of the things that we've done is working together in partnership with TSA. This Thanksgiving, we implemented a program where we installed high visibility signage at all of our security checkpoints regarding firearm education. And so passengers are aware that the firearms will not be allowed, obviously, at the checkpoint. We also worked with TSA to reach out to all of our partner airlines to make sure that they educate the traveling public when they go to the checkpoints, either through direct engagement and conversation between their ticketing agents and the passengers, and also through high visibility signage that the airlines can use to go ahead and deter those types of things happening at our checkpoints. We're also exploring potentially messaging through our rideshare services and going ahead and having our Uber and Lyft services here at the airport have signage in the different vehicles and go ahead and advise passengers that we have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to firearms being carried on to or through our checkpoints. So we have taken steps already in an effort to be proactive and try to curb that. And so far, those efforts have been successful. Our numbers have come down from approximately an average of 2 to 3 confiscated firearms per week pre the implementation of these measures. We're now, as of January, we had 3 in a month. So in the month of January, we had 3. So those numbers seem to be coming down. What we're doing seems to be working, but obviously we're open to other potential solutions. And I'm willing to listen to all of our colleagues. I mean, obviously, we could always use additional TSA staff. Nobody's going to argue with that, and additional funding in that regard. But we obviously take the problem extremely seriously, and we look forward to the conversation. And I thank you again for the opportunity to testify before you, and look forward to working with all of you to get through this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. I'm having a bit of a problem with my camera. I can't see you. I hope you can see me. But in the meantime, I will try to figure this out. So I need to thank every one of the witnesses for their testimony today. And I'm going to remind the members of the subcommittee that each of us will have 5 minutes to question the panel. Without objection, members that are not on the subcommittee shall be permitted to sit and question the witness. As I indicated, I did see Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. I don't know if there are any others on, but she will be recognized. I'm now going to recognize myself for some questions. I'm really interested in talking about the ripple effect on the airport operations when a gun is found at a TSA checkpoint. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Biodari. When TSA identifies a gun in a passenger's carry-on luggage, please walk us through what happens operationally.
So when the Biodari Hartsfield Jackson, General Manager, when the TSA screened the bag, there was an anomaly that was not readily identified. And the TSA pulled that bag aside for secondary screening, unaware that there was a weapon in the bag. Had a passenger, knowing that there was a weapon in his carry-on bag, reached in, grabbed the weapon, and in that scuffle, the weapon accidentally discharged. Once the weapon discharged, the checkpoint had couple of hundreds of passengers in queue waiting to go through security screening. And you could imagine the confusion that occurred at that instantaneous moment where passengers start running. They just abandon everything and start running for cover. Our law enforcement officer that was at the security checkpoint, the minute he heard that sound, looking at CCTV video footage, he started moving towards the zone of fire. He called in for backup, and then from there, Atlanta police took over their response and very, very quickly ascertained that it was an accidental discharge. It was not intentional. and they started a search for this individual throughout the airport public area. We were certain that he didn't made it into the secured area of the location. And then from there, once we ascertained that it was secure, it was unintentional, and APD secured the scene for further investigation, we moved towards reopening the airport. The airport was closed for approximately 2.5 hours. So talking about this incident itself, there are other rippling effects, and one of those is the financial impact. We estimate that for every hour, because of the magnitude of our operations here, that this airport is closed, it has a financial impact of nearly $2.5 million to our stakeholder, to the airline, to the concessionaire parking revenue, and so on and so forth. But again, we were fortunate that our skill was so well honed. Just a day before, we conducted an active shooter exercise, so it was fresh in the mind of everyone. And despite that exercise, our team is continually training because we know the chaos this could bring to an airport.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Wallace, from the law enforcement perspective, what does your response entail?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for the question. Much like described earlier, they are staff intensive. So a general response for a gun, firearm in a bag at a checkpoint looks like this. Mandatory minimum of 2 officers. We know there's a firearm present. Here at PDX, we've spent many years working with TSA on establishing an incident command system. So we have a mini incident command with our sergeant, so that's a 3rd police officer, and their screening supervisor. And one thing we also have that I think most airports have, if the passenger reaches for the gun or there's a discharge, we also have the alarms installed at the checkpoint. But on an average gun in the bag, we have established a small area at each checkpoint where once we secure the firearm, determine that the person is not dangerous. Obviously, if the person is showing signs of being threatening, we would take them into custody. But in general, the passenger is willing to come with us while we run the firearm to make sure it's not involved in any crimes, is not stolen, see if it's loaded, question the person, and then at the end of the day, we have 2 ways to go. If the firearm is seized because it's evidence, it's extensive packaging and forensic evaluation of the firearm along with criminal charges. But more often than not, as you've mentioned, and others as well, it's just a civil penalty. We do write full investigative reports on every gun at the checkpoint. We also forward those civil incidents to the FBI because, as mentioned, there is a corresponding federal felony charge that looks much like our state charges for the firearms. And that's kind of it. If we seize the firearm, there's a lot of ways it could go, but more often than not, we do not.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. My time has run out. I did want to ask questions about the fines. I think that's something that you all have addressed in every one of your recommendations. So if not one of my colleagues doesn't cover that, I will cover that in a second round. I'll now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Jimenez.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Question: if maybe somebody has the answer to this, what percentage of the folks that have a gun in their carry-on, how many of them, what percentage of that is on purpose, and what percentage of it is, hey, I forgot, I didn't know, it's a mistake? What are the percentages there?
Congressman, I would say here in Miami, I would say the vast majority, probably more than 95%, are inadvertent carry-ons. In other words, it's not a purposeful or somebody with some kind of ill intent. In the majority of the cases here, the vast majority of the cases, it's somebody that has forgotten. They're used to carrying and they've forgotten, and they go to the checkpoint, and then that's where the situation goes south.
Okay. Does anybody have a difference of opinion that it's not 95% that is inadvertent?
In Atlanta,
Yeah.
Congressman, in Atlanta, a great majority, 90+%. Oh, I forgot. And the good the data is showing us that if they're caught with a gun, we don't have repeated offenders.
You don't. That's a great question. Okay, that was a question actually I was going to ask. What's percentage of repeat offenders, which means to me that they really weren't trying to get something through. So if 90 to 95% of the people is inadvertent, I'm not sure where heightened penalties are going to avert that. Because it was a mistake. I mean, you could charge me $100,000 if I forgot that there was something in there. I'm not sure that that's going to avert anything. And so there has to be, I think, the solution to this for 95% is greater signage all over the airport, so that it's not just doesn't happen just when you walk into the TSA checkpoint, that when you walk into the airport, there's no guns. And then maybe that'll trigger, oh my God, hey, I have a gun. And then is there a place, I guess, a place where if you do have a gun in your carry-on, that you say, hey, if you have a gun in your carry-on, you need to go check that bag. And there's a process for you to carry that gun so that basically you don't have to go back home, et cetera. So I think that is something that I would like to see: greater signage and options for an individual that may have forgotten that they have a gun in there. Or maybe their memory may be jogged. Now, in terms of the Atlanta incident, what concerns me is that the individual was able to grab the gun. Now, did the person grab the gun before it went through the checkpoint or after it went through the checkpoint?
So the protocol in Atlanta is if a gun is visible on the screening monitor, that gun is, the way our checkpoint and our system, the technology is designed, that bag will be diverted into a secure location and it will be handled. An APD, Atlanta police officer, will call to handle that bag. In this case here, the gun was not visible through the screening process. So the gun was diverted just for a bag search, a bag screening by a TSO, by a transportation security officer. And that's where the difference in the split was in this incident versus a bag that has a gun where the gun is visible on the x-ray.
That now opens up a heck of a lot more questions. How in the world was a gun not visible on the x-ray, et cetera? How was it that gun got through and the x-ray operator didn't see that there was a gun there?
So, Congressman, we could provide more additional information because I'm not a technical expert to discuss why that gun was not visible through the X-ray screening process. But the expertise here at the airport could certainly provide, and we could provide a written explanation to that question.
I guess you don't want to show why it wasn't. Maybe the individual backed a certain way, but that's concerning in and of itself, that somehow a gun got through without us knowing there was a gun there. And so again, Madam Chairwoman, maybe that's something that we need to discuss with TSA about the technology they're using and what percentage of bags may have guns that we don't even detect. All right. That to me is much more concerning probably than this 95% of the people that are carrying a gun, inadvertently. So my time is just about up. Maybe I'll have if you will indulge me, another round of questions after everybody's done. So thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Jimenez. And following up on your concerns, I agree with you. We're trying to get to greater understanding of how a gun wasn't detected, but something alerted a TSO to put that baggage into a second tier of scrutiny. And I'd like to understand what that was. If you didn't see a gun, what was it that alerted that TSO to move that bag to another location for additional scrutiny? Sir, would you know the answer to that offhand, Mr. Biadari?
I think the TSA officials could better answer that question, Congresswoman, because I'm not familiar with what they saw on the screen that caused the decision to be made for secondary screening versus diverting to the safe location for a weapon.
Thank you. I recognize Ms. Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. You know, it's really important here in Las Vegas because we've got the 5th busiest airport. And now that the economy is coming back, more and more people will be coming. And also we have so many sporting events that we expect to see more people coming. We've had the same problem that's been mentioned by other airports, a record number of guns found last year, 83 by TSA. And that's a considerable increase, and we worry about it increasing more. Just a couple of questions to whoever wants to answer it. One is the large number of the people who come through our airport speak a different language. They don't speak English. And last time I had a bill that was required TSA to put up signs in other languages. And I wonder if they feel like that signage to explain you can't carry a gun in a different language might be adequate. Also, as more people pour through here, if you find a gun and it disrupts the whole process, how do you deal with the people who are behind you in the line and now want to go catch their plane and they got to stop because somebody's found a gun and it's causing confusion at the checkpoint? And finally, just briefly, what about these 3D printed guns? How are we going to be dealing with those?
Madam Chairwoman Titus, thank you for the question. This is Jason Wallace with Aileen and the Port of Portland Police. There are a few layers to that. So for the most part, that's the reason we require multiple staff on those calls, is partly because of that crowd management. And TSA actually does a really good job if the checkpoint lines are slowed or shut down, of diverting and opening up different lines. That's been my experience in your airport and here at PDX. They do a really good job. The 3D printed gun question, that's been on our radar for a few years and a concern. Obviously, the main concern is safety for everybody involved. The fact that it potentially violates, regulations that are already set up on firearm production and distribution. And it really would make it difficult for law enforcement after an incident on the forensic side to do our normal checks, whether it's barrel, how things work. And then obviously we have concerns, and as mentioned earlier, what technology is there to detect those? I know some of the TSA equipment is very good at detecting polymer-based constructed guns, and I know it's improving, and it's probably an area that needs to be funded and explored further. And it is a concern for law enforcement.
Would somebody address maybe the language problem, if that is a problem?
Right. Representative Titus, here in Miami, in our case, all of our signs, even though we have a very large Hispanic community, our signs are all in English. However, they're clearly illustrated, so it's like a stop sign. You'll see an illustration of a gun with a red line through it. So I mean, it's very, very clear in our case. It's a universal type thing where it's clear that a firearm is not allowed. So we were clear on that. When it comes to checkpoints, et cetera, I mean, our biggest issue is when a firearm is detected and confiscated, typically one of our lanes in our checkpoints are closed down, which reduces our throughput by 25%, which is a major impact for us. And if that period of time is extended, then that ends up in passengers missing flights, et cetera, schedules being disrupted. In some cases, some chaos at the terminals, the disruption of the resources that we have, assignment of police officers, et cetera. So those are some of the impacts we deal with almost on a daily basis here.
Thank you. So you can use universal symbols if you don't have all the different languages. It might be, that's good. Okay.
That's correct.
Well, there's just been so much hostility in airports with the virus and the mask and the spacing that I hate to see this. People get backed up and that contribute to it. So appreciate the good work that y'all do. I see you every week when I fly back and forth to Washington through the Las Vegas airport, and appreciate what you do to keep us safe. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Titus. I just want to share with the group that there was a TSA statement that said that the firearm we were talking about was detected as it passed through the scanner, and then it was moved to secondary screening, which is Then I was also told usually if a gun is found, the bag is held inside the X-ray machine until the law enforcement arrives. So there really is a good reason to speak with TSA and try to get the real skinny on this. Madam Miller Meeks?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank you to our witnesses who are here. This certainly is an important topic. And I just want to follow up a little bit on what Representative Jimenez had asked in reference to how many times are firearms found or left in a bag and it's accidental. And then the follow-up question was that how many second offenders are there? And I'm sure this is something that you track, and the answer was none. So are there ways that TSA can proactively, i.e. at the airports, you constantly hear messages, where to park your cars? Are there messages that can be relayed prior to going through security so that people get out of the line and remove their firearms if they in fact have firearms, and then check them?
So Congresswoman Miller Meeks, if I
I'm sorry.
understand the question, this is Theodore from Atlanta Airport correctly. How many of those weapons that are discovered are deliberate or just forgetfulness? Based on what the police records show, most of those that are apprehended for a weapon in their carry-on luggage at the checkpoints claim that they forget the weapons. And that's in the high 90 percentile. Of repeat offender, last year I think we only had one repeat offender of the 507 weapons that were caught at a checkpoint. Messaging are done in a number of fashions. We have dynamic messaging, static messaging, pictorial, multi-language, local media, customer service standing in the queue line, reminding passengers to check their luggage one more time to ensure that they don't have any guns in their luggage or any other prohibited items. So it's done multiple times along the journey to include when you check in on either your app or the airlines. There is a whole set of messaging by the airlines to talk about prohibited items.
Yeah, I've seen the static messages on a message board, if you will, but I've not seen other messages in the numerous airports that I've traveled, at least not in the U.S. That was why I was asking my question, so that people are pulled out of the line if in fact it's accident.
Congresswoman.
Congresswoman, you're muted.
Okay, my phone says I'm unmuted, so I'm
You're
sorry.
fine.
I will yield back my time.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Recognize Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this timely hearing. This question is for all the witnesses. What challenges do firearms pose to the security of the public areas of an airport, such as ticket counters, baggage claim, and parts of the concourse before the security checkpoints? Anybody?
Take a stab at that question. Jason Wallace, Aileen, Chief of Police of Portland National Airport. So,
Yes,
you know, since September 11th and even before September 11th, threat scope and concept has shifted as more active shooter events and more dynamic threats or shooting events have occurred in public areas. So that is an extreme priority for all of law enforcement in this country and also in others. Unfortunately, we've learned many lessons from other countries as well on the threat of explosives, firearms, and even edged weapons in the public area. So back to my original statement, that is one of my main concerns with the staff resource drain for these folks who say they forgot their weapons, because the weapon still is dangerous. It was originally in the public area and it could discharge. And it's also a weakness in the system. I think we've clearly identified that over the last 3 years, regardless of fines and the current messaging and the current signage, the number of loaded firearms in every airport has just blown it out of the water. It's at crazy levels. So it's a concern to me. And I do think we need to do something to prohibit those loaded weapons from coming into the front of the terminal and not making it to the checkpoint.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Congressman, it's very alarming when the TSA discovered 5,972 weapons in 2021, when they screened 300 million less passengers, and 86% of those weapons had a round in the chamber or had a magazine, a loaded magazine in the weapon. Very, very alarming. And as the chief said, just an accidental discharge as demonstrated in Atlanta in November could cause mass panic.
Thank you.
Congressman,
Yes.
Congressman Payne, I would say that to answer your question, here, at least here in Miami, the threat that exists pre-security will be the same threat that would exist in any other venue that's not in the airport. That would be obviously accidental discharge, the potential of using a firearm in a crime, obviously the worst scenario, which is the active shooter scenario. So all those threats exist at airport pre-security the same way they exist in any other venue here in Miami, whether it's a restaurant, a movie theater, a public park, etc. The threats are the same, and we take them very seriously here. Obviously, we have more than 150 police officers that go through our terminal every day. We increase sweeps during holiday periods, etc. when we have increased passenger volumes. But I would say the threats are exactly the same here as they are in any other public venue whenever any of us go out.
So as Alan correctly said earlier, we're looking at grandchildren.
Somebody needs to mute their phone. So Mr. Reagan, what have TTD members shared regarding their feelings of safety at work when open or concealed carry is permitted in airports? And what about when guns are caught at checkpoints in the airports where they work?
Well, thank you for that question. I think honestly, the biggest thing we get from TSOs and from members of AFGE who represent those workers, most of the complaints about their workplace have to do with their lack of workplace rights and workforce rights that every other federal employee has. So whether it's at a place where there's open carry or not, ultimately, their day-to-day ability to do their job is hampered by the fact that they are denied some of the basic rights that virtually all other federal employees are granted.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Madam Chair, I'll yield back, but we need to continue our work, as I know you have and Chairman Thompson have, to advocate for TSOs to be brought up to the federal standards that they deserve. They're on the front lines here of our security every single day, and we need not let them not be compensated to those levels. And I know you feel the same way. So thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. As I go to our last speaker in the first round, who will be Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, I just want to kind of put on the record my thought about this issue about folks forgetting that they had a gun in their check-in luggage, on their luggage they were going to take onto the plane with them. That's the last bag you generally pack, is the bag you're putting all your stuff in that you're going to take on the plane with you. It is hard for me to believe that everybody that gets caught, or 90% of people that get caught with a gun in their bag, forgot they had it. And even if they did forget they had it, it's still an illegal act, and we need to be treated as such. And with that, I'd like to recognize Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're being recognized, ma'am.
Thank you very much to the chair and to the ranking member for this hearing, and to the witnesses that have been very provocative. And I was certainly aware of the shooting of the TSO officer in California and the sadness and tragedy of that, overwhelming tragedy. And so the issues that I want to discuss deal with how we get to a better place. First, I'd like to ask Mr. Reagan. You know that we've been working on legislation, HR 9903, the rights of TSA workforce. We know that there is morale issues, meager pay, low morale, lack of workplace bargaining rights. And I'd be interested in how you could expound on how making sure that TSOs are paid fairly, trained with extensive training, and have a better voice in the workplace that continues to impact on keeping the skies secure.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. And yes, that piece of legislation you mentioned is critical. If you look at the morale rates among TSOs, it is really really distressing. The fact that we have people who we put our lives in their hands to make sure that our aviation system is secure, and they're being treated on an unlevel and unequal playing field with the rest of the federal workforce is just a crime. And when you look at what happens, the results, frankly, for the federal taxpayer, the fact that we have such high turnover rate, if you look at a 10-year period ending in 2018, they replaced the entire TSA workforce over that time. You cannot retain people that you're training at a very high level with high security responsibilities in a high stress environment, unless you're going to compensate them well and give them access to other federal benefits that, frankly, their supervisors are granted. So I just don't think it's a sustainable model that we currently have.
Finally, would like to say that perhaps we missed and asked the right question.
Yes.
Or sort of an issue.
I have a question of Mr. Wallace. Thank you very much for your question, your answer, Mr. Reagan. Mr. Wallace, can you walk me through what occurs at the checkpoint? You deal with law enforcement element of the TSA. Walk me through what happens when a passenger comes in, and let me use this terminology, and don't use it with disrespect, but feigns lack of knowledge about the gun that they forgot to put somewhere else. What and how do we handle that?
Congresswoman Jackson Lee, I appreciate the question, and I appreciate your careful wording of the question as well. So the good news is that TSA staff and law enforcement treat these incidents the same from beginning to end, regardless of the statement or the stated mental culpability of the person in possession of the firearm. So it is intensive, and depending on area constraints, like we heard from Las Vegas, it can shut down up to 25% of their screening queue. Some airports have a little bit of a broader area in the back, and you can actually move the person within their rights to do a further investigation. But most airports are really constrained, and the action is confined there at the screening checkpoint. So we would conduct an interview, we would secure the firearm, and get statements from the person. And what we do find more often than not, the person says they forgot it. We do look for things like, how is the bag packed? Is the gun sitting in a particular area? There's a lot of different things law enforcement would look for. But you are right. Most of the time people say they forgot. But I would just like to bring this up. After 26 years in law enforcement and dealing with multiple criminal justice issues, most people for most crimes investigated that I've spoken with say they didn't know or forgot that whatever prohibited item was in their possession. So I might be a little more pessimistic than some. I don't always believe folks when they say they forgot it. Some I do. Some clearly it has and happened. But again, that's very, in my opinion, irresponsible gun ownership. And to forget you have a loaded pistol in a bag that you're submitting to TSA for screening, to me, is an issue. Thank you.
So let me pursue my line of questioning with the time that I have left. You remove the firearm, you separate the firearm and the passenger, then what happens? The firearm remains in your possession, the person can leave the airport with a ticket, or what is the circumstance? They want to make their plane? How does that, they go back to the checkpoint? When I say the checkpoint, the counter to to check it? Go ahead.
So I appreciate that. Yeah, depending on the layout of the airport, many or all those things could happen. But in general, the weapon is separated. And I think even in states where it's hard to find an ultimate criminal charge for citation or arrest, all airport law enforcement have the ability to detain and investigate further to determine if there is a crime. So the firearm would be processed. And at the point we decide we're done and the TSA has all their information for investigation, and I'll take the lowest level. If we think all we have is a civil violation, to your point, it's a problem. We have to enact solutions to escort the person off, make sure their firearm is secured. We no longer, as a matter of course, just release them back into the public area with a firearm. So that is a problem. What do you do with the firearm after they've missed their flight and now you have an armed person that should not be in your public area?
Well, thank you. I see that my time has expired, Madam Chair and Ranking Member. This is a very important hearing and the probing. I could probe Mr. Wallace for a long period of time. Pardon
Madam
me?
Jackson Lee, I'm going to give you a second round if you just bear with us in a second.
Well, thank you so very much. And
All
thank
right.
Mr. Wallace very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
All the witnesses, thank you.
We've already concluded the 5-minute questions with each of our members, and so I'm now going to offer a second round of questions. I'm going to start with asking a question myself. Currently, TSA typically assesses the $3,000 civil penalty for bringing a loaded firearm to a checkpoint, or $1,500 for an unloaded firearm. But given the surging number of firearms at checkpoints, these fines are clearly not acting as sufficient deterrent. So, Mr. Wallace, I want to start with you as law enforcement. Would increasing the civil penalties in your mind that will be assessed against passengers unlawfully carrying firearms encourage travelers to be more vigilant?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. I would say any general criminological theory starts with this question. And the one thing that we know is if something is swift, meaning the application of whatever the penalty is occurs quickly and not at a much, much later date, is severe enough that the person does not want to do it, or if they did commit a crime, they don't do it again, and certain. So I would say out of those three factors, the ones that I question are the swiftness and obviously the severity, but the certainty. And what I mean by that is, although we have fines at $1,500 to $13,910, and I understand that many mitigating or aggravating factors could be applied, I am not aware that we routinely fine on the high end, and that's certain. I've heard that if people have a 30-day payment plan, the fines can get reduced or some other mitigating information, and it really, to me, does not address those three factors. And just from a pragmatic and practical approach to law enforcement, we deal with this all the time. Take your areas of speeding where there's pedestrian issues and potential deaths. If we have a speeding problem, we cite speeders, okay? This to me seems fairly simple, that if we have this problem, and I think we do, we issue citations at whatever level we can. Currently, the one consistent way people can be cited is the civil regulatory penalty.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. So, Mr. Reagan, I have a question for you. There's this sharp rise in unruly passengers at the checkpoints and even aboard the airlines over the last few years, and it's alarmed me greatly. In my opinion, the last thing we need is these situations and a gun in the mix. It seems to me that the possibility of a tragedy is difficult to overstate. What sort of planning, if any, have you done to prepare for a potential situation that involves a hostile individual with a legally carried firearm in the public area of an airport? And on a broader topic, maybe that's for you, Mr. Wallace, but on a broader topic, Mr. Reagan, I want to ask you, do you believe that cabin crews would benefit from additional defense training to deal with unarmed, but very unruly and very dangerous passengers? So, Mr. Wallace, if you give us a quick run through was what I asked you, and then Mr. Reagan.
Yes, so I know that all the TSA flight crew staff, everybody from door to ticket lobby back down to baggage claim, it should receive some level of training and awareness level training. And from what I've heard when we have participated in that, it's been received very well by flight crews and ground crews. So yeah, I think it can't hurt anything, and we do here at PDX, as part of our broader active shooter training, roll all those groups into it at some level.
Thank you. Mr. Reagan, please.
Yes, thank you. And I agree. I think having additional training for flight crew members, for TSA agents, for passenger service assistants, all of them could benefit from some additional self-defense and de-escalation training. We have actually pursued over several years now legislative fixes to try to protect people better, airline workers especially, better at the airports. One of them involves requiring airports and airlines to have customer service agents protection plans that are going to be approved by the FAA. And that's something that was in the last FAA reauthorization bill in 2018 that we're still trying to make sure is fully implemented. But all of these things, and at every step of the passenger experience, whether it be through security or when they're getting ticketed or when they're boarding the plane or to the time they are on the plane itself, every person has a key role to play to making sure that that entire trip is safe. And they all deserve every tool in their bag at their disposal to make sure that they can do their job safely and to make sure that there aren't threats to themselves or their passengers throughout that process.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Reagan and Mr. Wallace. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Jimenez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And please, I didn't say that we shouldn't have penalties. I'm just saying that if the majority of the people don't know they're carrying the gun and it's an honest mistake, then we need to have more signage so that they don't get to the point where they make that honest mistake, so that it kind of reminds them, hey, you know, you may want to look in your bag before you go there. And then whatever penalties that we have, the people that have made an honest mistake, you could charge $1 million. It's not going to deter them. They made an honest mistake. And so what we want at the end is to have less people, you know, come through with a loaded weapon and get on the plane with a loaded weapon. I think, and if it's the most of them are making an honest mistake, I think we need to do better with signage and other ways to try to remind them, hey, you got to take a look at this. Question, can you carry ammunition on carry-on? Without a gun, can you carry ammunition?
Jimenez, thank you for the comments before. And yes, I agree with everything you just said. We get called for ammunition. Ammunition is not supposed to be allowed on carry-on. It's based on my understanding of the TSA screening rules.
It's not.
Now, even these printed guns, they have to have ammo, right? And it's not printed ammo, right? It's normal ammo that goes into these printed guns?
Correct.
Okay, do we have, how good is our technology and finding this ammo on carry-ons?
In my experience, I think TSA is very proficient at detecting ammunition.
All right. Now, one other question. What percentage of flights have a weapon in the check bags? Anybody know that?
I do not.
I don't have the answer to that, but if you check a weapon in your check bag, you have to declare it. If you fail to declare that weapon, then that bag, once it goes through, that check bag goes through screening, that weapon is detected, and it's treated the same as an undeclared weapon, an illegal weapon.
All right, so-
That bag is removed.
Okay, I'm getting to the Fort Lauderdale incident. So that, okay, does the destination airport get a notification that there is a checked weapon coming in on flight 40 from Miami? Does the destination airport get that kind of notification?
That weapon should never leave the airport of origination because it has to go through screening. So
I know. I said no. I'm saying I checked it right. Okay, I went through, got it checked. There's a checked weapon going to wherever I'm going, right? And it's legal, so it's getting there. All right. Now, does the originating airport tell the destination airport that on flight 47 from Miami, there is a checked weapon in the bag?
Congressman, when a passenger legally checks his weapon with his checked luggage, it goes on the passenger's PNR, passenger name record, which then becomes part of the record that the airline that's transporting the passenger keeps. So to answer your question, that information is available in the passenger name record, so it's identified.
That's how we,
Okay, no, but what I'm getting to is, do you, I don't know if I have any time left. Okay, I do. Okay, what I'm getting to is,
time to
No, the
ask.
information is not pushed.
okay. What I'm asking is, does the receiving airport know that there is a checked weapon in that bag? And then do they then notify law enforcement that you need to go to this carousel because there's a weapon in one of those bags so that we avert what happened in Lauderdale? Does that happen?
I can speak to that part of it, Ranking Member Jimenez. That is not the procedure. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we deal with more with long guns. People are flying to Alaska. There's a hunting population. So I can tell you that for oversized items, things packaged like a hard case with rifle, there's a little bit of notification, but that's all within the airline. And unless there's some sort of criminal nexus or TSA or federal air marshal notification because of the person, that really is not passed on to local law enforcement.
Okay, the reason I asked, that's the reason why I asked how often does it happen, because you could be overwhelmed. But if it's something which is rare or not that usual, then you may be able to put a law enforcement officer there just to make sure that we don't have another Fort Lauderdale. That's all. Okay. So thank you with that. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Recognize Representative Sheila Jackson Lee as the last member to question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thank you for the questions. I'm going to go to Mr. Wallace, please. Again, thank you. Ms. Wallace, we were in a line of questioning about just what happens with the process at the checkpoint. And in spite of your very effective sort of narrative, what happens is that there are different laws that you deal with in different states. Is that not accurate, Mr. Wallace?
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
And so you follow those state laws in terms of the individual that is there. So let me try to go back to what has to happen with different TSOs. So most of them wind up with the gun in their possession? Because how do you escort the person out, do you think, with the gun if you view it as a civil and you convinced that they really didn't know and had a mistake? And I remember some of the incidences where the person ran, and so it was more than that, and got lost inside in all the confusion, and airports were literally, they came to their knees, to be honest with you. They were not planes going in and out. The people couldn't move around. But let me yield to you for your response.
Yeah, Congresswoman Jackson Lee, thank you for the question. Yes, and over the years, we've developed some procedures here locally. Not every airport, and we didn't used to do this originally, but now when we come into contact with a firearm, because we had such a problem with exactly what you're mentioning, of just handing a firearm back to an owner and letting them walk back through the ticket lobby. What we do now is we break the gun down. We actually put it in the same kind of a box. It's very unassuming, cardboard box with tape. Hand it back to the owner, and we do escort them out of the public area. It is a concern, and it's the best we've come up with so far. But ultimately, to your point, yes, we hand the firearm back, and the person does receive it if there is no criminal charge.
And they walk themselves out, typically?
We usually walk them at minimum as far as the front of the terminal, sometimes a little farther. But yes, once they get to the pedestrian areas of the airport, they're in possession of their item.
And so maybe I didn't hear this. What about the individual that says, keep it, I've got to get on my flight? What happens with that person?
We've done that as well. We do have permission boxes on our evidence and property forms for destruction. But I would say the problem with that, and I'm working with our local district attorney, and this is a problem that comes up across the country, if somebody changes their mind, and it's not a piece of evidence, we have a problem. Then since we're in possession of that firearm, even if we want it back, we have to follow the ATF rules for transfer of a firearm. So we've had that happen quite frequently, where someone changes their mind once they're back from their trip, and we haven't already destroyed the weapon. They've consented, we've processed it, it's waiting for destruction, they change their mind, or their attorney calls us and says they've changed their mind, or they can get a judge's order that says they've changed their mind, and we wind up having to follow a pretty labor-intensive process of firearms transfer rules that dealers have to go through.
So it would be helpful if all airports had major signage as people even put their first foot into, maybe in the parking garage, as well as first foot into that open area as they come in to check in.
I do think consistent signage that lists the fine and have the firearm with the prohibited sign would be very effective. And I'm sensitive to airport property owners because I know there's a lot of signs. But yes, signage I think would be helpful. If not for a deterrent, also, if we do have somebody who's a bad actor and we can articulate signs were there, they were informed of the rules at check-in at the counter. There was another sign at the screening queue. It does potentially help with intent. And if we do have a true bad actor and not just somebody who forgot, it does help us with resolution. And
some penalties that might be, if more effective, might be helpful as well.
I do believe so, yes.
Thank you. May I quickly go to Mr. Bioderi, and just to you and your airport work, just tell us how we can enhance airports or encourage airports to really invest in signage, because a weapon is so dangerous to the general public and those who are flying.
So thank you, Congresswoman. Signage have to be multilingual, and it has to be dynamic and eye-catching. It has to draw the attention of the traveling public, and that's what we are doing here in Atlanta. Is we're looking at an entire suite of packaged static and dynamic signs of how we could draw the attention before they submit themselves to screening. That, you know what, a gun is not permitted in the security screening checkpoint. I think Congress ought to discuss this issue with the TSA and have a national discussion on messaging this to the general traveling public.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member.
You're welcome. You're welcome. With that, I'd like to, I notice that there are no more questions to be asked in the second round by any different new members. And so I'd like to thank each and every one of the witnesses today. You've been very helpful. You've and certainly enlightened us and given us some kind of guidance on where things we need to look at and go in next direction. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions even after this quite exhaustive hearing that we've had. And so we'd ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions should you receive them. And the chair reminds the members of the subcommittee that the committee's record will remain open for 10 days. Without objection, I pray that you all stay safe, stay well, and the subcommittee stands adjourned.